Welcome everyone, and I know more folks are going to join to this Sociate Q&A session. This is the first one actually for this year. We had several of them last year, and very excited to have our speaker Aviel joining us, Stern alum, and we'll get into his background, and he will share a lot of exciting stuff today that he's working on about his company Stoic Media. And before we get us started, I want to make sure that a few of the not ground rules, but few of the rules that we follow. Please enter your questions in the chat window. Initial set of questions Marcy is going to ask, as we have done in previous Q&A, and that will be followed by your questions, and we'll pick them up in the order in which they're entered in the chat window. So with that, let me welcome Aviel to this Q&A session.
Thank you. I'm really happy to join everybody here.
Cool. So I'll kick off with the first question, Marcy, and then maybe you will go with the other. So I will just for the brief background as people are joining in. Do you want to kind of talk about your journey, obviously from Stern? I know you've been at multiple companies, and what led you to this current company which you founded, Stoic Media?
Sure. Thank you. So happy to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Aviel. I am a NYU Stern alum, class of 2016. And well, my background is I was originally born and raised in Mexico City. I was one of the first people that joined Google when Google started their Latin American operation back in 2009. I was actually employee, I want to say like 15. And then I worked for Google in Mexico for about 3 years. And then I got transferred to New York, which is why I ended up in New York. And I then kept on working at Google for a few more years. That is exactly when I started studying at Stern with the part-time evening program at NYU Langone Stern. So from there, I switched after Google. After 6.5 years at Google, I started working at Facebook, always in digital ad sales. So initially it was Google Search, Google Display Network, YouTube ads, and then a product that was then called the Google Affiliate Network, which is affiliate marketing online. For Facebook, I worked on just straight up Facebook ads, and I worked on when Instagram started launching their Instagram ads. This is again back in 2015 or so. Seems like a mile away. Anyway, and then so I worked for Facebook, and then I was hired by Univision Communications, which is a very large Hispanic broadcast network, also in New York. I worked there for about 3 years, and after that, there is a Mexican company called Cultura Colectiva. They are, in a nutshell, they're the BuzzFeed of Latin America. They started opening their office in New York City, and they needed a head to lead their sales team. So I did. So I brought some of the folks from the sales teams within Univision to work at Cultura Colectiva. And so while I was there, it got me. It was interesting. I was, because I was in sales, I was meeting with media agencies every single day, from Group M, Publicis, Mindshare, PhD, Cara, you name it, and with direct clients, brands like L'Oreal, Toyota, and so on and so forth. When I was there pitching Cultura Colectiva's product, it was interesting because instead of asking me, hey, why, how much would that campaign cost with you? They would say, look, this is all great, but how much does it cost for me to produce a video, meaning production? How much would it cost me to produce a video like that with you? And I was we're not selling production services. We're selling media. And basically, that happened a few times, and it just got me thinking, I'm in the wrong business here. Clearly I need to pivot. So then, I kind of stepped away. A few things happened within the company that led to me, founding my own business called Stoic Media, and thus starting to produce white label content for brands and for publishers. So that's kind of the journey. To be honest, I never really thought of becoming an entrepreneur myself throughout my career. I always thought of myself as, growing within the corporate ladder and maybe potentially specializing in a niche or is it media potentially, or strategy, to become some sort of C-level executive at a large firm. But again, life happens, and so did the pandemic. And the pandemic actually was beneficial for me because, of course, a lot of people started consuming much more content on their phones, watching a lot more TV. So all of my clients, broadcast networks and publishers, started to gain a lot more traction, a lot more audience, but still they did not have the wheels or the internal means to produce the amount of content that their audiences were demanding. So in a way, within my line of business, the pandemic COVID was beneficial. It sounds weird, but it was. So again, we start producing
Yeah.
content for some brands, and then thus, I ended up where I am right now. I hope I didn't jump around too much.
No, you did answer. You answered a little bit about our first and second question, but I'll have you go back and explain even just a little bit more about not just, I mean, you started to explain your business model, but maybe if you're allowed, and again, tell us if, any of this you can't share it and we completely understand, but maybe just a little bit more also about some of the customers that you serve, what markets they're in, geographically where you're, how far is your reach, because you guys are growing and expanding, but I do know you specialize in a couple of regions and areas.
Sure. Yes. So while our business is based out from Brooklyn, the niche market when it comes to media production became what we call multicultural market. That is Black community, Hispanic, LGBTQ, and Asian, right? So basically, and more so, we started focusing on the Hispanic side of media. And why? Because Hispanics, and this is just a bit of bit of numbers. Hispanics at this time represent about a fourth of the U.S. population. One out of four people have Hispanic ascendants. It is a really large sector of the economy and the population that's quickly growing. And so Hispanic media, and I don't mean Spanish language, I mean culturally relevant content, is of course in high demand. So while we're based in New York, our biggest clients are located here in New York, in Florida, of course, California, Chicago, and Texas, which are clearly the largest Hispanic hubs across the country. So again, mostly because almost everything is digital, right? All is files transferred, everything's on the web and in the cloud. Location isn't as important. It does come into play when you have to actually shoot image, video, photography, whatnot on site, right? Specific locations where you actually have to be there. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter where the team is located, because a lot of the work is within the post-production phase of content production, right? So I'm hoping that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I guess we can jump right into it, because I know, kind of the way we kind of phrase this talk is that we talk more about using content to build, brand equity or amplify a brand's messaging. So I would say, I don't know if you're permitted to share a few examples about how you're doing that with your specific customers, or if you want to be just a little bit more generic about some of the best ways and approaches and techniques that you're using with your clients that have been the most successful. And then on the flip side, we'd love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, obviously there's downs just like there's ups. Would love to hear some of your lessons learned as you've gone through this as well too. And everybody else, please feel free. You guys probably know a lot more about marketing than I do, at least some of you. So feel free to either just raise your hand or put your questions in the chat too, because I'm only going to ask the high level, and then we'll let you guys ask what you're most interested in.
Sure. So I'll give you a few examples of situations where we're partnering with large broadcast networks or mid-sized broadcast networks that again are kind of the larger side of our business, and how we're executing producing content. So of course, because I had been working in places like Univision, a lot of the folks there ended up working at other networks. And I'm the type of person who I strongly try to keep my my network tight, and on an ongoing basis be in touch with people just wondering what people are doing. And so I'll give you an example of again, just types of content. So for example, Univision, they have a very large local news network in terms of local stations, pretty much in, I want to say, 41 cities across the US. They're great at producing content for TV, right? But again, because people are consuming now a lot more on mobile and what we call OTT, over the top, the format of the content needs to be, again, shifted, right, or adapted depending on the platform. So we ended up partnering again with folks like Univision, potentially like Canela. Now with Telemundo, we're starting to look into CBS Interactive, and we're working with them in terms of getting their TV content plus some stock plus our original production, animated 2D and 3D, to package news, and instead of having them be 5 to 10 minute reports or folks talking just on the mic, we're flipping them to making them much more digestible when it comes to digital consumption. So we're really good at turning those types of material around in a very quick manner. Meaning, you can imagine, at this point we're producing about 400 videos per month, 2 minutes each, and these need to be produced really quickly because it's.
Well, I was just going to say, it's the news, right?
It's news. You can't.
You take too long, it's already extremely out of date.
Exactly, and it's minutes, right? By the time you get it around, nobody's going to watch it. So we've worked very hard in trying to streamline production in a way that is easily manageable by broadcast networks or other clients, but at the same token, that it doesn't become a burden internally to the employees of the company, where they'll be bummed down or burned out quickly. Because it's easy to get burned out when you need to produce a whole lot of video every single day, and as you can imagine, it's very labor intensive. Again, edition wise, right, post production wise. So again, we're always working and learning new formats because, of course, this is ever evolving. But at the end of the day, it's how well you communicate with your clients. It's how well you treat the team, and are tightly, I guess, in communication with everybody, so that you can quickly identify red flags when they come about, and do something about it.
What were some of those red flags that you kind of encountered along the way, if you can share maybe one?
Of course. So we had this is an interesting one. I won't call who, what client with this, but basically we wanted to produce 3D animation to recreate certain scenes for news that were not captured by camera. So I'll give you an example. I think it was last year, there was a shooting in San Antonio. Some crazy person opened fire and within a shopping mall, and so nobody actually captured the scene, right? So the news were there, but people couldn't see what happened, right? And everybody, when it comes to news, they want to see a video of the actual incident. So they asked our team if we could produce 3D video to recreate the whole scene, the shooting, which is a huge undertaking. And this was meant to go live on TV primetime. So of course you have a clear deadline in terms of deliverables, and it really has to be really buttoned down and well formatted. And so because this happened the very morning, so this was early morning, I think in Texas, we had about, I want to say, 7 hours to animate the whole thing, and then render it, right? Because rendering takes a lot of computing power, and then format it in a way that they could actually air it on TV. So we worked very hard on trying to produce this. And long story short, there were certain elements within the video that were not super accurate. For example, the weapon that this person used was of a certain kind, right? When we animated the video, the weapon wasn't exactly the exact shape of the actual weapon that was used. So that was not, they couldn't air that, right? Because that would be called fake news, right? And so a broadcast network cannot take the risk of having just very small details, then be missed, and have another network calling them, hey, you're actually not accurate. It wasn't a pistol. It was it was a assault rifle, or whatnot. So again, it was very hard for us because the team worked really hard. We ended up not delivering the material as it was supposed to be delivered. And so it put us in an awkward position with the client, because they had entrusted this, this is breaking news. This is, of course, it's going to go national live. We had a deadline to deliver at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. And by the time we delivered, it was just, it wasn't accurate. So they couldn't air it. And they basically said, we're not going to be able to work with you anymore. This is a big deal. So we lost that piece of the account. So it's one of those things where, as an entrepreneur, you're always a little bit too inclined to say yes to new projects. Sometimes wishful thinking, or the eager to go big get in the way, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. And instead of benefiting the team, it sets you a little bit back, and that comes with other things, right? Demoralization. We were expecting certain revenue stream from that project that, of course, ended up not happening. So some other projections of other projects didn't end up. It just kind of trickles into other things, right? Other projects that get impacted by that. But anyway, I guess the takeaway from this is, you end up learning, right? You should. I think it's very important that everybody knows their limits, as it pertains to what can you do, and how can you deliver, and when can you deliver, and don't put your firm at risk if you have certain doubt that you'll not be able to deliver. And if you're not going to deliver, it's better to openly communicate that with a client, instead of waiting till last minute and kind of scramble and have it be a little bit of a mess. So yeah.
Absolutely. And that's interesting, because this was not one of the things we chatted about in our kind of prep talk for this. So this is interesting for me to hear about it. And that's what as soon as you started leading in with your story, that this was about recreating something in 3D animation, and knowing that mostly what you're doing is providing or putting together other types of more live type of content. Like, to me, that already sounded so big and so different from what your core, more bread and butter is, and being how you are. And of course, you always want to grow and stretch and expand, but your company is still relatively on the newer side. You're still acquiring new accounts. I don't think we asked you, but you've officially been incorporated 2 years, 3? I can't remember.
Yeah, we're closing in on 3 years now.
Yeah, and you've got about, I think you said, a dozen or so clients, or maybe I'm underestimating. I apologize.
Yeah, so I guess percentage-wise, we have, I want to say, 4 large clients that would potentially make about 80% of our revenue, and then the rest 20% is made up of kind of one-offs, if you want to call it that, or smaller clients.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to know. And Yasmin, thanks for asking the first question. You can come off mute and ask it yourself, and I'll save my prepared questions after we answer yours, because these are more interesting.
Oh no, yeah, no. I just so when first of all, like, thank you for all your insight, and for sharing actually these stories, especially this last one with the red flags. That was actually very, I currently in my company, actually, there's this kind of issue too, where it's like, it's hard to kind of come to terms with, okay, what's the group's limits and so on. But when you were first developing your business model, and when you were first kind of going about all of this, what were some of the issues and roadblocks you had faced?
Sure. So usually, at first, I think that the legal component of incorporation was a huge enigma, question mark to me. I'd never gone through this. Of course, I had heard that if you don't follow certain rules, or if you don't comply with certain documentation you need to file and whatnot, you can get easily fined and potentially mess everything up, right? So I kind of had to learn on the go when it comes to the legal incorporation piece or component of starting up a company. I did get some advice from other folks or friends of mine that had started up their own company. So I kind of started doing a checklist of things that I needed to know or do or register or certify or what. Again, there's so many things in order to get everything settled and lined up. Now, once I had that, I guess financial planning. Of course, I'd never done any financial planning for launching my own company. So I did. I did think of, for example, going out there and raising money, which I did, and did not get 1 cent. So it was very discouraging at first because I had this idea, I had the potential clients that they wanted to buy this product, but because the nature of this business is so dependent on cash flow, so you can imagine payments for this industry, again, media. The average payment terms are 90 to 120 days. So, to keep payroll and to, invest and grow the company, you won't be receiving any income up, 3-4 months from that date. And it's really hard to raise capital if you cannot prove or show that you've actually generated a revenue in the past. So it's kind of like chicken or the egg, right? So in my particular case, when it came to financial planning, to be honest, I had no other way for me to get this started other than dipping into my savings and borrowing from my 401k to finance production and to get the ball rolling. So of course, it was really scary because nobody wants to dip into their savings, and that's something that everybody always says don't like that. You should leave that, invest it, and don't use it. But at that point, I was like, look, this is almost like a sure, an assured business because I already have folks that wanting to sign an IO, right, an insertion order for certain things, and I was like, I'm just gonna go for it. And my wife was really supportive, and she was like, look, let's just do this. If you're ever going to become or try to become independent or run your own business, this is the time. This is the time, and sometimes you got to just it takes a little bit of somebody else to push you and so yeah, I mean, and Yasmin, to answer, I don't know if I'm answering questions, but there are all these things that I just did not like. I just didn't know. To be honest, yes, I finished my MBA. Of course, they taught us a great deal of when it comes to entrepreneurship and risk taking and financing, but at the end of the day, you're there on the street, and it comes down to what decisions you're going to take and what risks you're willing to make, and if you feel that you feel confident enough that that's going to be fruitful, then you just it's a leap of faith in a way, so yeah, that was my experience. Yeah, and hey, I'm 2 years or 3 years after, I'm still having my own doubts and I'm still wondering if I did right or wrong. And I have other friends that kind of started their business around the same time I did within the media space, and they're much larger now in terms of headcount and revenues, but they did raise capital, right? And so that doesn't, in my view, that doesn't necessarily, it's not either good or bad. It's just a different route. It's different decisions. And of course, there's a lot more liability and, like everything, a lot more pressure, it's harder to make decisions because there's a lot more people that get involved when it comes to decision making. The whole operation for a company becomes different when it comes, when it is indebted or, when it has risen capital. So again, I'm kind of, digressing, but again, I don't have a right answer. I was, afraid of this or that, or, what were the shortcomings? I want to say everything, it was kind of hit the ground running and figure this out and be open about it. Like I sometimes I spoke to friends and I had my my doubts around how to make a decision, and I just ask for advice. Even if they're not in the industry, like, hey, I have this problem. How would you go about it? Just be open and transparent about it. And I got great advice from friends and family, and even other folks within NYU or other schools that gave me great advice. And I didn't even think that I would get that advice from them. So anyway, just be open, transparent, and try to be as communicative as possible to overcome those fears and challenges.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's, I like hearing these stories of like how people started to, got their business started, because you look at them and you're like, where did this come from exactly? Like, and when there's just so much missing, but you're able to like, you're able to make something out of it, out of all the shortcomings. That's like really awesome to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks, Aviel. This is great. And I think, and before we get to Sarah's question, which we'll get to in just a few seconds, you said two things that I think resonated with me. And thinking back over all the other speakers we've had, and 3/4 of them have been kind of entrepreneurs as well. Only a couple were here to talk on behalf of like a big corporation. I think two things you said kind of resonated. One is that everybody needed to rely on their mentors kind of whether it was a formal or informal board of advisors, trusted advisors, to help them with some of these early on decisions, because nobody can do it alone. And then another thing that I heard you say, just talking about your wife and needing that extra push to, you wanted to do it, but you just couldn't, what actually made you feel comfortable to take that leap was knowing that, yeah, your partner was there and, was going to be supportive of it. And you felt like at the same time, I'm sure that you had a little bit of a safety net in that sense. Not to mention you came from big tech and big media. I'm sure in your mind you thought, oh, I could always go back if this doesn't work, but you were hoping that wasn't the case. And Allison Moss, which was one of our earlier speakers, she talked about the same thing. I remember, I don't know if people on this call were on that one, but she talked about the same thing about, it was the discussion with her partner, and that, helped her get over the line too, to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and move forward. So, this all makes sense, I think. And okay, let me let this person in. And then Sarah, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I actually interned for Sociate last semester. And I'm a first-year full-time MBA at Rutgers, but my background is in film production. I did my bachelor's at NYU, and something that I didn't know that I was going to be interested in before I started my MBA, but now I'm very interested in, is valuation of companies and things. And I'm thinking about how content is valuated, and I'm wondering if when you take on projects for clients, these big companies, if like the immediate value of that content and maybe even the future value is something that you consider, and whether or not that affects the pricing of your services. And if not, like, how did you go about how to figure out how to price your production services?
So that's actually a great question. Thank you, Sarah. And it's one of the most difficult ones, because pricing when it comes to content can vary so much, right? Even with an animation, 2D animation, right? A 1-minute video, 2D animated, could cost $150, or it could cost $10,000. And so it really depends on what you're putting into it and what the expectation in terms of the return on that video or that piece of content is, right? So we basically have two business models in our company, right? One is a fixed monthly fee for certain amount of minutes produced by a certain type of content. And so we assign our resources to producing that at mass. And that is very beneficial for our client, because then they distribute, they monetize, and they decide what to do with it. And they actually know the amount of content that we'll get per month, right? So they can do their own financial planning. Now, of course, there are other clients that do not believe in monthly deliverables or monthly amount of content. They're more interested in one-offs, right? So when it comes to one-offs, it's really hard to price. It comes down to the amount of man-hour or people that will be, working on the production animation, post-production of that piece. And so from that, you got to get a proxy of the cost that you'll incur. And then again, just depending on what the expectation from that video is, you'll be able to get a price range, right? But again, and thirdly, I want to say if it is a client that you'll see or foresee working with for a number of months or weeks or for the foreseeable future, you can package a certain amount of pieces of content at certain quality type, and so that's kind of an incentive for them to secure more or to commit to purchasing more of that, again, for the foreseeable future. At the end of the day, I'm sorry I don't have a straight answer, but it's a lot of also understanding on the street, right? What is a certain type of piece of content piece go for, and what does it entail to produce, right? So 1 minute of 3D animation, doesn't matter if it's sports, entertainment, news. It's much harder, to produce than just 1 minute of 2D video, 2D animation. And even with 2D animation, if it's hand illustration, it's very much different than using stock to produce and animate, right? Again, there's so many variables that go into this, rendering, computing power, licenses, right? Certain softwares that permit editors or animators to produce certain type of quality of content versus others, right? So you got to factor everything in when pricing something to clients. I hate to say, but I don't have a clear answer to your question, Sarah.
No, thank you. I mean, just to hear you discuss like some of the challenges of this is fascinating. And like, I have no experience in animation, and that's not something that I even thought about, that you'd have to factor in things like computing power versus like a traditional production crew when figuring this out. I think it's an interesting time to be considering this, because in the absence of people going out and seeing major motion pictures, for example, the industry kind of had to figure out like, well, if we don't have box office receipts, like how are we going to figure out what these projects are going to be worth in the future? So whether it's a 1 minute video or like a major movie, I think it's something worth discussing. Thank you.
No. And I'll give you an example. So in that past example I gave on that, that breaking news incident in San Antonio, our biggest, I want to say, bottleneck that we faced was rendering. Rendering the 3D animation was what kept us from delivering in time, because it was so heavy for us to again render that we had to reach out to other third-party rendering services for them to again render the project in a timely manner, and it was super expensive, right? So again, when we were pricing these, we did not take into account the amount of time that it would take for us, given our back then, given our computer power, to be able to deliver on time. So each project is so different, right? Because you don't know, or you should know, the amount of computing power you should have in order for you to deliver in time. When that needs to happen. So again, just an example.
Thanks so much. Those were great questions. And Aviel, don't sell yourself short. You are giving so many answers, even when you think you are not, because you are very candid and you're sharing your honest experiences, and you're tying them to real life things that have happened to you and your company over the course of the past few years. So that's what I'm saying. We always, I enjoy having people like you come speak at these events, because you're not giving these cookie cutter vanilla answers, the same answers that anybody else would give or what you think people want to hear. Like, you're just telling them the reality of how it is. And I know right now we don't have other questions in the chat, but you guys feel free we can clearly talk about anything and everything here. I do have a couple of other, and I hope other people are not hearing that feedback that I'm hearing, but I do have a couple other questions more general that I think everybody might be interested in. And the first one is kind of what are you guys focusing on, or what's on your roadmap that you're allowed to share, or some of your goals for 2022 and beyond?
Right. So Stoic Media basically has, Stoic Media's goal is to help publishers have great content and monetize on it, right? And so we are not a publisher ourselves. We don't have blogs. We don't have our own, distributing platform. But because we work with so many publishing platforms such as, again, blogs, newspapers, broadcast networks. We started our business in producing white label content for them. Right? That's great. That's our biggest revenue stream at this point. However, as the business progressed, we found a way to also kind of start a second line of business within the company, which is a monetization of that content. And by that I mean we started working with certain companies that provide software that help publishers monetize ads programmatically. Not sure if folks on the call are familiar, but this is basically programmatic ads, right? Running, display or video ads on publishing pages or OTT or on TV, connected TV, et cetera, et cetera. So our focus for this year, in addition to growing our book of business for our white label content production services, is being able to help those publishers and other publishers monetize display, which we have been doing for the past year, but this year we want to launch video, right? This is pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll when it comes to video players. So that's a focus that we're now, that's a focus area that we're now honing in on, and that we're trying to figure out what is the best software given the CMS CMS is the content management systems that our publishing partners are using, and of course what does it mean to work with open auction programmatic versus private marketplaces or even direct guaranteed deals. So we're venturing into the space of programmatic to kind of sell our kind of 360 services. Again, we'll help you produce your content, run it on your platform, and plus we'll help monetize on it, do some sort of rev share, and then kind of grow. Everybody grows, kind of win-win situation.
That's really interesting. So I'm assuming you are targeting, Aviel, like smaller publishers, because the bigger ones are using the likes of Google and Trade Desk already, I'm assuming, or?
Well, not necessarily. So, everybody uses Google. That's, let's get the elephant out of the room. Small, big, from New York Times to like the guy down the street. But there are really great technologies out there that are being developed by other startups or mid-sized companies that can overachieve what someone like Google is doing. I'll give you a good analogy. When in the before times, people would go out and buy plane tickets, right? They would go to Delta or United, and they would purchase New York to LA ticket, and that was it. Get the best price, boom. But certain sometime in the 2000s, Kayak, Travelocity, Orbitz, all the OTAs came online, and while they were not an airline, they did aggregate airline results. That was bringing pricing down, and they made a business of it. So if you take that analogy to programmatic, there's a lot of new technologies that aggregate demand from the biggest supply side platforms such as Google, Amazon, AT&T, OpenX, Rubicon, Problematic, and so on and so forth. They aggregate the demand in benefit of the publisher, right? The publisher gets higher yields, plus the advertisers get more exposure to, again, more publishing platforms. So again, I'm not saying that we're going to compete or somebody's going to come in and compete against Google, but there are certain technologies when it comes to programmatic advertising that enable new features within the space, and that kind of that they help the whole industry evolve and move forward in terms of giving more yield, more control as to what's happening on people's websites. Here's another example. I'm not sure if people have heard of Google Core Web Metrics, Core Web Vitals. This is the new standard for creating websites, publishing websites, and it's basically how well that your site renders, how quickly it responds, and there's a number of different features that the websites nowadays have to have, or else they won't be indexed on Google search results. So it's not only now about the content or the HTML, it's about the response that the actual site has, right? How responsive it is. So again, there are technologies now that enable, from a tech side, publishers to have better results and to be better indexed within search results, and thus getting more yield for the banners they run or the pre-roll that they run on their site, and so on and so forth. So I'm just saying these few examples to illustrate how even small companies with great ideas and great software can have a massive impact that could potentially, drive the industry in a way that, Google didn't even foresee, So again, just an example.
Got it. No, it's really interesting because you're providing not only the video, but as well as the monetization of the video, if I got that correctly, through the
That's what
programmatic
we're trying to
channels.
achieve. Exactly.
That could be really interesting if this takes off with this additional revenue stream, because the inventories for video, at least, is a little bit more, has a better red card, right, than display.
Yes, CPMs on video are 8 times as bigger or better than display. That's just the nature of the industry. So yeah, we want a day where, of course, higher cost per 1,000 impressions are. So that more revenue and higher yields.
Yep. We had quite a few of advertising folks on our panel before as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, and so with this, anticipated growth for this year, this kind of leads me into another question, something we chatted about your kind of your hiring needs and all of that. I know we talked about, some positions you're currently hiring for, and maybe they aren't necessarily in the MBA space right now, but I still think people would be interested to know kind of where you see your hiring needs going. And also, something I didn't ask you is, are you also planning to possibly bring like an intern on for the summer or anything like that?
No, yes. Thank you for bringing this up, Marcy. Right now, I think we're covered in terms of new hires, but we do have a few pretty large projects that hopefully, not knocking on wood, that they'll consolidate. And if that happens, we'll definitely need to hire. And by that, I mean biz dev, literally sales, straight up salespeople, as well as folks that know, for example, the programmatic, about digital ad sales, and potentially about content production and video producing. So yes, that's definitely because we're foreseeing higher consumption across the board when it comes to content, animation, original, clipping, edition, post-production services, you name it. We're definitely going to need very talented folks that can help us out and come join the team. Now, I think, as you say, when it comes to MBA, of course, MBA is a lot of a strategy. There's a lot of finance that comes into play. If the company grows even further, we're definitely going to need a CFO that can take on financial planning and all things related to debt, potentially raising capital, positioning the company to again grow in an organic way and in a healthy way. While I study an MBA, I'm by no means the right person to take on such a task, and I'm sure there's other folks that are studying MBAs that are focusing on financial planning or finance or financial strategy. That's not my case. And we would be very much very happy to onboard.
I thought it was interesting. Recently, we had an opportunity shared on Sociate, somebody who also started their own company, and they were looking for a part-time CFO. So they must also be in a similar phase, I would say, of their startup, because I've never typically seen a CFO advertised as a part-time position in the past. But now it makes me think that they must be kind of more in this growth, forward-looking stage as well.
No, and I just want to add one more thing. So
yeah.
When it comes to onboarding tech talent, nobody really knows who and when people should be hired, other than the numbers within the company, right? I'll give you an example. When first year, we didn't have a CPA, right? When we founded the company, because we had barely any revenue, and it was like, look, I can do it myself, or I'll just file my personal taxes and I'll include the LCCs within my personal taxes. Last year was the first year where I and one of my colleagues were thinking about, like, hey, we should definitely think of bringing in somebody part-time that can help us with accounting. And so we did. Last year was part-time. This year, we're almost full-time because we're meeting with this part-time CPA almost on, every other day to, talk about certain things. We're not there yet where we need to hire a full-time CPA, but I'm sure we will in the foreseeable future. Same thing's happening with bookkeeping, right? We never thought about having a bookkeeper, right? I didn't even understand what the concept of a bookkeeper is.
Right.
But this year is the first year that we've now hired a part-time bookkeeper, right? I'm not thinking of hiring a full-time bookkeeper until we actually see the need for it, because it'll become sort of again a bottleneck for us to grow. So it's the business. It feels like it's the business that tells folks how and when to hire somebody full-time. Otherwise, you're putting a financial burden on the operation if you're hiring somebody full-time that really doesn't need to be there at that certain point in time. So it feels like it should organically grow to a point where it's more cost efficient and more strategic to onboard somebody full-time versus having part-time services.
Right.
So you move forward.
Yeah. Well, just a slightly related note, because unless anybody else has a question they'd like to ask, something we didn't discuss, but you just touched upon, you weren't thinking about these type of employees at first or those type of employees, but there was more than one co-founder, and then you had to have your initial set of employees in order to get things off the ground. So how did you get your first employees to buy into your vision once you decided to take the plunge? I'm very curious about that, and we did not talk about this, I don't think.
Yeah. So the way it happened, and again, these are all content producers, right? These are very talented video editors, animators, and so on and so forth, editorial journalists. The first few projects that came about, I didn't quite have to sell the project to that person. I kind of I hired them as a contractors for a specific period of time for a specific project, right? So again, they basically set their hourly rate for them to produce certain type of content. I knew from references that they were talented. I had not worked with them before, so I had to take a look at their past work just to be sure that they're up to the standards where they need to be. But I subcontracted, right? They were contractors at first that started working, one-off projects, and kind of as the operation grew, they kind of became full-time, right? So it was kind of at first it wasn't about selling the project. It was about can you do this, and how much will you charge for you to produce this specific product, in a specific amount of time. So yeah, slowly they of course fell in love with the project, and they also came from them like, hey, clearly you're hiring my services often enough. Why don't we formalize some sort of a working relationship, and then we'll be a team, and of course that's great. So that's kind of how it started.
Excellent. And I will also have to ask before we do just like a wrap up question, kind of your words of wisdom. But first, I don't think we actually touched upon this other than your previous relationship. So I know some people have joined late, so you may not have known that Aviel had a very long kind of corporate career in big tech and big media before starting his own company. But so was it just simply those relationships from those past roles that led you to your current client base, or how else have you gone about acquiring some of your other customers, maybe your smaller customers that weren't from those previous relationships at your other jobs?
So that's a great question. I want to define myself as a LinkedIn stalker, period. I live on LinkedIn, and of course I've been hiring all these other tools similar to that help identify leads. I've worked with Winmo, I've worked with Media Radar, I've worked with ZoomInfo, now we're working with Seamless AI. These are tools that kind of add-on tools that provide specific information about leads that will help or enable people like me to reach out, right? So I spend, I want to say 70% of my day, every single day, reaching out to folks that I believe can become qualified leads for the services that we provide. And yeah, so email, I was always in digital ad sales, and I did some cold calling in the past. Kind of like, used car sales guy. I want to say I am the guy that does a lot of cold calling and cold emailing, but I've become in a way resilient to no, to the word no. And this is something that I'm grateful that I worked in sales in the past in different types of roles, because you end up, growing very thick skin, and you really understand and learn how to not care if people, if people say no, or just don't want to hire your services. That's fine. It's a numbers game at the end of the day. And if you have a great product, and if you have great service, and you can prove it, then it's about persisting and just moving forward. So yeah.
Awesome. So I would say, just kind of, if you could leave us with any last words of wisdom. I know you already talked about some lessons learned, so kind of like, let's flip it on its head and say, looking back now, and of course you're still learning, still many mistakes and ups and downs to be had. That's what any entrepreneur will tell us. But kind of, what are some of the pieces of advice that you would give others on this call, whether they're pursuing, it doesn't have to be specific to media, but just even pursuing their own venture? I would love to kind of hear through your perspective on that.
Okay, I'd say number one, there's not a right time for anybody to do this. That nobody ever said, okay, I woke up this morning and this is the right day for me to make this move. Everybody has their own circumstances, and it just takes that push and a little bit of self-confidence that it'll be okay. And if you fail, at least you tried, right? So one is that. Second, don't be afraid to put in a little bit of your own personal resources into starting up this venture of yours. It's super scary. That's one of the most scariest things that happened to me. And looking back, it's one of those things that if you really believe that this will work, you gotta put some skin in the game.
That's what Sarah Blakely of Spanx did. I think it was, she started with $5,000 of her own money or something like that. Now she's a billionaire.
Yeah, don't be. I mean, don't go crazy and go all in, but try. Put some skin in the game. Why not? Right. Third, I want to say your personal network is worthless. It's worth a lot more than if you don't know who to hire, reach out. Don't be afraid that people look at you like you're crazy, or like, reach out and ask the questions that you don't know how to answer, because a lot of people know the answers and you just don't. And so they'll save you a lot of time figuring things out. And I want to say, go for it. It's one of those things. I remember in my entrepreneurship class at Stern, I remember Oken. He was a professor back then. He said,
a lot of us took him.
I remember him first aid class. How many here want to own their own company? How many here want to be an entrepreneur? Everybody raised their hand. And after that, right after that, he said, well, you know what? Only about 3% of startups end up making it through the first year. Right. So clearly, if you guys are, 40 of you here, maybe 1 or 2 of you will make it. All the rest will fail. It's just a numbers game. And to me, back then, that was very discouraging and frightening, But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to a lot of your gut feeling. And if you really believe in the project and you see the market for it, and you have one good client that you'll be able to close, just to get the ball rolling and then apply yourself into doing a lot of biz dev, you should go for it. You never know. And if you fail, that's fine. There's a lot of jobs out there. They can, clearly everybody on this call is very highly qualified to do a lot of things. So don't be afraid. And who knows, you may end up being one of those billionaires with a great product and doing some good for the society.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Aviel, thank you so much. I know, which we often do. We never just stick to the one topic. I appreciate that we can go anywhere, to all the different corners of your business, and talk to you about anything. So
no, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, I think everybody appreciates
me.
the answer too.
I love talking to folks, and I really wish everybody. And if somebody has questions, please, you got my email.
I was just going to say, I'll send a recap out with some of your, best tidbits and lessons learned from here. And if you're okay with it, which it sounds like you are, I'll share your contact info, and I'll probably ask you after this maybe to share one or two of your favorite resources, whether it's a book or a podcast or something. I always like to ask our speakers to give recommendations. So I'll put that together in an email to send out to all participants, even the ones who couldn't make it today, who are very excited to watch the replay here. And we'll share that out. And Randeep, I know you just probably wanted to mention for a second, I think we have our next event finalized. So I don't know if you wanted to briefly mention that for 10 seconds.
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Aviel. I mean, that was great. I think we covered more topics than, frankly, I think Marcy or I were probably thinking.
I made many notes.
Yeah. Now I will have that animation video in my head now, I think, for some hours. But I think it was really, really helpful to understand. I think what you said, right? You have to go for it. And I think that's what we see with so many entrepreneurs. So hopefully everyone enjoyed this session. Very quickly for everyone on the call, and Aviel, you as well, because you are associate member. We have our next Q&A session coming up on April 14th, if I'm correct. I think it's Thursday or one of the weekdays, 5 o'clock with Roman, and he is the CEO of Casa Living. They are kind of like the Airbnb, but for hotels and for more apartment chain operators. So very interesting company. They're growing a lot. He's also a fellow Ukrainian, and he's been really impacted by what's happening over there. So hopefully you guys can join and do the Q&A. Join us on the Q&A with Roman.
Yasmin, did you raise your hand, or was that a mistake on the button?
Yeah, that was a mistake. Sorry. You know what I was trying to do? I was trying to find, on Zoom when they have like the clapping hands. I was trying to find that.
I don't know where that is on Google Meet, but yes.
Yeah, so it was a mistake, but sorry.
No worries.
No worries. So again, thanks to Aviel. You'll get more information on the upcoming event. And as always, let your friends and MBA classmates know about Sociate.
No, thank you, Randeep, and thank you, Marcy, for this. It was great talking to you again. And whenever you want to reach out, I'm here for everybody. So if I can help, please do reach out.
Absolutely, we'll take you up on it for sure. I'm so glad we were able to do this. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.